Sally here, and today we're going to explore a powerful idea that can change the way you attract women, especially as you get older. And you know what's most interesting? It has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do with looks, and it definitely has nothing to do with those cheesy pickup lines you find all over the internet. The truth is, these two words activate something much deeper in the female brain, something that triggers emotional connection points that most men don't even know exist. And look, I'm going to tell you exactly what these words are. I'll explain the science behind it. But there's a detail that almost no one notices. And it's exactly this detail that separates the men women forget from the men they can't stop thinking about. Stay with me until the end because this information can completely change the way you communicate. Let this land for a moment because most people never stop to think about how attraction actually forms in real life. Not in movies, not in social media fantasies, but in those quiet, ordinary moments where someone either feels something real for you or doesn't. And if you've ever walked away from a conversation wondering why it didn't click, even though everything seemed fine on the surface, you're not alone. A lot of men experience that invisible gap between effort and emotional impact. They show up, they try, they speak, but nothing sticks. And then they watch someone else do less, say less, and somehow create more interest. That gap is not about luck. It's about psychological presence. It's about how your words land inside the emotional world of the person in front of you. If you've ever felt that frustration of being overlooked, or feeling like your intentions don't translate the way you mean them to, I want you to stay with me here. Because what we're talking about today isn't just dating advice. It's communication at its most human level. And before we even get into the words, I want you to understand something deeper. Attraction is not created by perfection. It is created by emotional clarity. So, as you listen, don't just think, does this work? Ask yourself, have I ever actually shown up like this in my own life? And if something resonates, I want you to share it in the comments, because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to understand they're not alone in this either. Let's begin with something important. Sarah, host of What She Thinks YouTube channel. For years, I've studied thousands of interactions between men and women in real-life settings. Not just theories, not just advice floating around online, but actual patterns in how people respond to each other emotionally. And what becomes obvious very quickly is that attraction is rarely about what is said in a single sentence. It's about the emotional direction behind it. It's about whether a man is speaking from a grounded place of clarity or from a place of hesitation and approval seeking. And this distinction changes everything. Most men don't realize that when they speak, they are not just delivering words. They are transmitting emotional signals. The brain on the receiving end is constantly scanning for consistency, confidence, tension, warmth, certainty, uncertainty. This is not conscious. It's automatic. It's part of how humans have evolved to read intention. And in romantic interaction, especially early stages, this scanning becomes even more sensitive. The female brain, like any human brain, is not mysterious, but it is deeply attuned to emotional safety and emotional direction. It asks, without words, is this person clear? Are they grounded? Do they mean what they say? Do I feel something stable here or something chaotic? And here's where everything starts to shift, because the men who stand out are not necessarily the ones trying the hardest. They're the ones communicating emotional certainty without over-explaining themselves. They don't flood the interaction with approval-seeking language. They don't overcompensate with jokes, explanations, or nervous filler. Instead, they do something surprisingly simple but psychologically powerful. They express desire and appreciation in a way that feels grounded, not needy, not performative, but emotionally aligned. And this is where those two words come in. But before we go there, I want to slow this down even further, because if you rush past this foundation, you'll miss the real transformation. Think about the last time you had a conversation where everything felt easy. No tension, no trying too hard, no second guessing. You probably didn't remember the exact words. You remembered how you felt. That's what we're aiming for here. Not scripted perfection, but emotional resonance that stays in someone's memory long after the interaction ends. Now let's talk about what actually changes behavior in attraction. One of the most studied concepts in psychology is emotional anchoring. In simple terms, it means the brain links a person to a feeling. If someone consistently makes you feel seen, safe, intrigued, or emotionally stimulated, your brain begins to associate them with that emotional state. And over time, that association becomes attraction. Not forced attraction, but learned emotional connection. This is why timing, tone, and emotional congruence matter far more than people realize. And this is exactly where most communication breaks down. Because a man might say something correct, but if his emotional state is uncertain, the message loses weight. It becomes noise instead of presence. On the other hand, a simple sentence delivered with grounded confidence can feel unforgettable. That's the paradox most people miss. It's not about complexity, it's about alignment. Now let's bring this into real life so it actually makes sense. Imagine a man on a date. He's been out with this woman for about an hour. The conversation has been good, nothing forced, a few laughs, a few pauses, a natural flow. At the end of the night, instead of overthinking what to say, instead of playing it safe with something vague like, "We should do this again sometime," he pauses. He looks at her directly, not intensely, not aggressively, just present. And he says something simple and grounded, not rushed, not rehearsed, just real. That moment, when done correctly, becomes emotionally significant. Not because of manipulation, but because clarity stands out in a world full of hesitation. The brain remembers clarity. It relaxes around it. It trusts it more easily than ambiguity. But here's the twist most people miss. It's not just what you say, it's what your words reveal about your internal state. And this is where we begin to uncover the first core phrase that changes everything, because it reveals direction, intent, and emotional honesty in a way that most people avoid entirely. And before we even say it, I want you to notice something. Most men are trained, socially and emotionally, to avoid being too direct, to soften their intent, to not come on too strong. But what actually happens is that in softening everything, they remove emotional impact altogether. And what remains is something forgettable. Not because it's wrong, but because it's emotionally flat. So what happens when you reintroduce clarity in a healthy way? That's where things begin to change. We start with something many men misunderstand completely. Attraction doesn't collapse because of one bad line. It collapses because of emotional inconsistency. Because what is said does not match what is felt, or what is projected does not match what is embodied. And when that mismatch appears, the nervous system of the person across from you picks it up instantly, even if they can't explain why. This is why we need to talk about congruence before we go any further. Because without it, even the most powerful words become empty noise. Let me bring you back to a simple moment. Imagine a man saying, "I want to see you again." If he says it while leaning back, relaxed, grounded, with steady eye contact and a calm voice, it feels clear. It feels intentional. But if he says the same words while fidgeting, over-smiling, or rushing the sentence out as if he's afraid of the response, the emotional message changes completely. The words stay the same. The energy does not. And people don't respond to words alone. They respond to emotional truth. Now here's where everything begins to sharpen. There are two simple phrases that, when used with emotional clarity, can completely change the way your communication is received. Not because they are magical, but because they are honest, direct, and psychologically aligned with how attraction forms in real time. The first phrase is, "I want." On the surface, it sounds basic, almost too basic to matter. But psychologically, it is one of the clearest expressions of internal direction. And internal direction is something people are deeply drawn to, especially in romantic dynamics. When a man says, "I want," without hesitation, he is doing something powerful. He is revealing that he has access to his own desires. He is not outsourcing his emotional state. He is not waiting for permission. He is not shaping himself around uncertainty. He is acknowledging what is real inside him and allowing it to exist externally. And this matters more than most people realize. Because one of the most common patterns that reduces attraction is emotional ambiguity. Men who constantly soften their intent often believe they are being respectful, but what they are actually communicating is uncertainty. And uncertainty creates emotional distance. Compare these two expressions in a real-world setting. I don't know, maybe we could hang out sometime if you want, versus, I want to take you out this weekend. I know a place you'll like. The difference is not just confidence, it is emotional structure. The first one places the emotional burden on the other person. It asks them to decide, to lead, to fill in the gap. The second one provides direction. It creates a frame. And psychologically, the human mind often relaxes when someone else is willing to hold the frame. But here's the deeper layer. I want only becomes attractive when it is grounded, not when it is forced, not when it is used as a performance. If it is used to push or control, it loses all authenticity. What makes it powerful is not dominance, but clarity. And clarity is rare. Now let's move into the second phrase, because this is where emotional depth enters the picture. I appreciate. This is where most communication either becomes one-dimensional or becomes emotionally complete. Because if all a man ever expresses is desire, the interaction can feel self-centered over time. But when desire is balanced with appreciation, something shifts. The interaction becomes relational instead of transactional. I appreciate signals something very important psychologically. It signals that you are not only focused on what you want to receive, but also aware of what is already present in the other person. And this creates emotional validation without dependency. Let's make this real. Imagine a man after a date. He looks at her and says, I want to see you again because I really appreciate the way you think. Talking to you feels different. Now pause on that. What just happened in that sentence is layered. First, there is intention. He is not ambiguous. He is not hiding interest. Then, there is recognition. He is not reducing her to appearance or surface-level attraction. He is acknowledging something internal, something cognitive, something personal. And that combination creates emotional depth. This is where attraction often deepens quietly, without effort. Because most people are used to surface-level compliments. You look nice. You're pretty. You're fun. These are not wrong, but they are common. And what is common rarely creates emotional imprinting. But when someone feels seen beyond the surface, something different happens internally. They feel recognized. Not evaluated, but recognized. And recognition is one of the strongest emotional triggers in human psychology. Now let's bring in something practical, because understanding this intellectually is not enough. If you want to actually use this in real life, there is a simple exercise that changes everything over time. Before any social interaction where you might feel pressure or hesitation, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what do I actually want in this interaction? Not what sounds good, not what is safe, what is real. Then, second question, what do I genuinely appreciate about the person in front of me, if anything at all? Not forced appreciation, real observation. When you practice this internally, something subtle changes. Your communication becomes less performative and more grounded. You stop trying to manufacture attractiveness, and instead you start expressing clarity. And people feel that shift immediately. Now, there is another layer most people ignore completely, and this is where timing becomes crucial. These phrases are not meant to be used constantly. They are not filler. They are emotional markers. They are used in moments where intention matters. At the beginning of direction. At the end of connection. In moments where memory is formed. For example, at the end of a meaningful interaction, instead of drifting into vague goodbye language, a grounded statement creates closure with emotional weight. I want to see you again. I appreciate this time with you. Simple, direct, no over-explaining, no nervous additions, just emotional clarity. And what happens next is not always visible in the moment, but later, when she replays the interaction in her mind, she doesn't just remember what was said. She remembers how it felt to be around someone who was clear, present, and emotionally aligned. This is where attraction becomes memory-based rather than moment-based. Now let's address something important because this is where many people go wrong. None of this works if it is used as a strategy without authenticity. People are far more perceptive than they are often given credit for. The nervous system reads inconsistency faster than language can cover it. So if you are saying the right words but internally feeling disconnected, anxious, or performative, that mismatch will be felt. This is why the real work is not memorizing phrases. The real work is becoming someone who can actually feel what they say. That means slowing down internally. That means being willing to sit with your own desire without rushing to hide it. That means being honest about appreciation instead of exaggerating it. It is not about becoming smoother. It is about becoming clearer. And clarity, when it is real, is naturally attractive. Let me leave you with something to reflect on. Think about the people you remember most vividly in your life. Not necessarily romantically, just emotionally. The ones who stayed in your mind longer than expected. Chances are they were not the loudest or the most impressive. They were the most emotionally distinct. They made you feel something specific, something stable, something clear. That is what we are really talking about here. Not tricks, not manipulation, not performance, but emotional distinctiveness. If this resonates with you, take a moment and share in the comments what part of this felt most familiar in your own experience. And if you want more insights like this, make sure you stay connected, because this is only one layer of understanding how attraction really works beneath the surface. And remember this as you move forward. You don't need to become someone else to be understood. You need to become clearer about who you already are.